I'm sorry. You can start, Mark.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark DiFrancesco. I'm a school counselor at Thornton. I've been in the counseling office for, oh my gosh, too many years. 20 over 25 years, and I was a teacher of English for quite a while. And I've got a lot of experience. Abby and I actually many years ago now began getting really invested in how much we felt we saw families certainly paying attention to, like, how to get into college and finding the right fit. But there was a time, I'd say 12 years ago, that there was a huge shift in college cost, and people just became overwhelmed with it. And so tonight, what we hope to do is have a presentation that is pragmatic. It's a little numbers based, but not like you can't understand the numbers. So I think the one beauty about, I guess, doing this remote, because we really like doing it in person, but one of the beauties of this is you will have hopefully at home a workstation or a pen or pencil. I hope you'll write questions down as we go. Um, so it's a pragmatic presentation. It can have some numbers in it, but if you follow along, and at the end we'll have questions, really what you'll learn is that your own family situation can be very predictable for the most part, barring very unique circumstances. Most families we work with, if they've been communicating with us and talking about the net price calculators, which we will get to, they find that we have a process that you can predict your family's financial situation for college. We're going to put up a screen that frames the night for you. I am going to read it to you. We usually would give a handout here for you, but I think the points of emphasis for tonight are where Abby and I are coming from. We really value post-secondary education, training, and skill development, and programs cost for that. We also work with a lot of students who don't go to college, so this night is definitely geared to uh, young men and women and their families who are predicting that they might have to pay for college. When we have students that want to do a four-year college, we really encourage that. Sometimes tonight you might hear us talking in such ways about the cost of college that you might be like, oh, they must not value that. But that's not true, and we don't say it. It just might be something people infer, like, whoa, college is a lot. Maybe you should. That's not the message, is not that. It's actually, we want you to not be scared by the cost of college, but we want you to learn to be educated and find and really focus on your family situation and not what the X family is doing or the Y family, because you'll learn from the things we present tonight that it can be very predictable as long as you stay kind of focused on your family situation. We absolutely do encourage our kids to spread their wings, both for admissibility and for financial um, cost of college. So as you communicate with us, Abby or I or your son or daughter's counselor, it is important, I think, to call us, talk to us about this. You might hear things at home from son or daughter like, wow, Mr. Defoe has me looking at 7 schools that are $70,000. And you might be like, what is he doing? But usually there's a balance there. So we do actually encourage to spread the wings, but we're doing it with the assumption that parents are educating themselves on their own costs so that they'll have a balance of colleges and understand what might end up being the best. Um, Abby and I are not financial planners, but we do feel after doing a lot of training, that we have a responsibility as college counselors to respect that each family has a unique capability. Like some families have a ability, high degree of ability to pay for college. We should know that. That helps us frame things with, we also have families that can't afford a lot of money for college, and we want to be really realistic about that. Um, so we do the spread the wings, and then the hopefully every family has affordable colleges in the mix when they're looking at them. And we keep saying we, this used to be a, in my experience, very student driven. And I didn't used to pay a lot of attention, honestly, to money. You might not be able to believe that, but things usually worked out. It, the cost of college was not prohibitive for families because the government loans and the costs made it fairly okay. Now, if we don't do our homework, we get into sometimes positions where we're only looking at colleges if we don't pay attention. I appreciate your time hearing me talk about the tools and the things that we're going to share with you that hopefully make understanding the affordability and the predictability of your own affordability possible. Abby, you should, oh, I guess I should say I've had a son go through TA, um, and he went to a community college. He didn't finish a community college, and I share that because I came to really respect that. At first, it was really a little bit hard for me, as much as I would always say to parents, it's okay if your son or daughter doesn't go to college. And I think that's a message you want to hear from us too. This is one aspect of our process, and I'm going to hand it off to Abby.
Okay, I think you were gonna do, so,
Oh, I just wanted you to say hello and
oh, okay. Hi,
and
everyone. I'm Abby Moore. I'm also one of the school counselors. Currently, I work with freshmen and juniors, and it's been a real sort of learning curve for Mark and me over the years as he pointed out, just in terms of recognizing our responsibility as counselors in addressing some of these things with families. Um, I have twin daughters who are currently freshmen. They're in their freshman year of college. So I'm very close to all of this. So it's also been really interesting to move through this, in a personal way right now, as well as professionally. So hopefully you can walk away tonight with taking some things, some important points away, and then certainly knowing that we are here and can answer questions and as they come up. I know I don't know exactly who's here tonight. This was we invited freshmen, sophomore, and junior parents. So, hopefully, I'm assuming there's a nice range here. So thank you. The fact that you're here, and I do want to point that out, the fact that you're just taking the time to attend this says a lot about sort of your willingness to be open and interest in learning more. So good for you. It's
yeah,
hard. It's a pretty it's a tough topic sometimes to talk about.
thanks, Abby. So I'm going to start with this slide, and hopefully not. If Abby will stop me if I get too wordy on this, because our experience has been, but I see parents getting better at this because of not only the things that we do, but I think some messaging is changing, especially with our partners at the Finance Authority of Maine. We'll talk about them maybe a tiny bit again. They're a nonprofit that if you just go to their website, FAME, they are such a great resource, but their messaging is also similar to ours, that families need to pay attention to affordability. So our experience is with a lot of families that, and it's very typical and exciting to be going to look at colleges and to think about which ones can I get into. And so we see a disproportionate amount of energy we think a lot of energy should be put there to the ability of a student to get admitted. Like, are they going to get into this college? Are they going to, so that is absolutely part of this. But with the changes in how much loan amounts became available 10 to 12 years ago, and that number being basically an open door to lend as much as you wanted as parents on behalf of your children, I began to see that I needed to say to kids, this is not your process. It is your and your families. And that sounded awkward to some of my colleagues because, we're supposed to be student-centered, which we are, but to not really have that understanding, young men and women really have a hard time paying attention to affordability. And it will be your responsibility and ours to kind of really get them to do that. So you can see those are the big ones for us to start with.
So I want to take a moment here just to define a couple of important terms that you'll often hear as you research and explore college costs. And I think sometimes we take this for granted, but the first one is cost of attendance. So as you can see from this slide, this cost includes the tuition and fees, room, board, estimated transportation and personal expenses. You'll sometimes hear people refer to this as the sticker price, or sort of the big number, the big scary number. So, and I think one of the things I want to point out as you look at some of the factors that go into the cost of attendance and what's reported out by the colleges is the fees, which, they kind of slide in there. They say tuition and fees, and sometimes those fees can be pretty high and really impact the total amount. So you really want to look at the whole thing when you're looking at cost of attendance and know what pieces are they're talking about when they talk about cost of attendance. The other, on the flip side of that, I'm just going to go back, but on the flip side of that, if you have a son or daughter who's looking to go to community college and will maybe be living at home or going to a local, USM or UNE and deciding that they want to live at home, you need to take that into consideration too when you're looking at a cost of attendance, that the room and board piece is not going to be a factor. Probably the second term, and arguably the most important one, is the net price, and this is the actual amount that a student will pay to attend an institution in a single academic year. As you can see from the example in the slide, net price is simply the cost of attendance minus any free money that's awarded to the student from the institution. So free money is any money that you don't have to pay back. That's going to include merit money. Merit money is typically, merit money is based on grades and test scores, so how a student has performed in high school. It's going to include grant money, which is need-based money, and scholarship. So as we look then, if we take, as we look a little bit further, it's important to understand how you as a family will cover the net price. So we put those funds into two categories: the out-of-pocket costs. So these are what you as a family, the student and the family, are going to pay, and then what's left over are the loans, and this is going to include any federal student loans, parent loans. So let's talk about out-of-pocket costs for a minute. These, again, you want to be looking at, I think too many families wait to see what it's going to look like. They wait to get those financial aid packages, when they come in sort of in the January, February, March of their senior year, and they think, okay, we'll just wait and see what those financial aid packages look like, to figure out what they are going to be able to contribute. And this is really working backwards, because and we know that because paying for college has become one area that we're vulnerable in, and as we don't, it's hard to pay attention to our own ability to pay. And so it's so important to consider all the resources that are going to be available to you. And, you're going to look at any savings that you might have, the parent or the student, your income, looking at, what can you afford, when you have your monthly bills, is there money there that you'll be putting toward college, anything in cash checking, what can the student be, what are they going to be able to contribute? So as you begin to consider these questions, it's really important and creates sort of a more concrete, clear picture, particularly as you move closer to the senior year, to become better informed and prepared. And then whatever is left over from that is going to be your loans. So, I want to talk now about the net price calculator. So this is probably the most important piece of this. If you walk away from this presentation with nothing else than remembering about the net price calculator, that will be enough, because this is a pretty powerful tool that, as Mark was saying earlier, is sort of one of those is a resource that you can use now to help you prepare. It is not a mystery anymore. It used to be when we didn't have these tools. You really did have to wait for those financial aid letters to come in to really have a sense of what you would be expected to pay. So a number of years ago now, I don't know how long it's been, but I don't know, Mark, what do you think? Has it been 10 years ago?
I think it was 2009 and 10 that some government agencies and politicians decided to make it a priority that they felt the colleges were, and I'm being fair in saying where the motivation came, not being honest about what the price of college would be. And so they required these net price calculators. And when they first came out, it was like people thought it was a gimmick, and it really wasn't. It just took some time and the government made it a law that colleges had to do this. And then colleges began to find out that they couldn't have what I would say amateur net price calculators. There are still some out there, but most of them now allow you to use your data to get the right answers. Go ahead, Ab.
Yeah, so I think when they did first come out, I will say that they didn't feel, when the government first mandated these net price calculators on every website, I didn't think they were especially accurate, but over the years, they become incredibly reliable in predicting what you can expect that net price to be. So, you can see here, they're not, and every net price calculator is going to look a little different in terms of what they're asking for, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But you can expect to create. It's going to ask you when you go onto a college's website. Typically, if you go into the financial aid section, you can find it there. Sometimes they've been better about bringing them to the forefront. For a little while there, they were really hidden and it was hard to find. But if you just put it in the search bar, net price calculator, it should pop up for every college's website. You can complete these net price calculators anonymously, so you don't have to put in any information, that's going to connect to you. But if you do want it saved, if you want to be able to save that information, they'll probably ask you to create an account. So I'm going to move right here. Oops, too far. Okay, so things that you're going to need to have on hand when you fill out these net price calculators. The more that you have with you, and it's only going to be as accurate as the information that you put into it. So with the right materials, you can get a more accurate estimate of your college costs. So some calculators are going to ask what tax forms you, the student or the parents, the parents or the students, if they're not financially dependent, will have filled out to complete. So having your 1040s, your W-2s will help to answer any questions, which may include, they're going to ask about wages, earnings, tax credits. I moved on. Oops, something happened. Sorry. There we go. It's helpful to have your bank statements on handy, because they're going to ask, what you have, in your checking account, savings accounts, some information about investments, property information. If you own a home, you may be required to report the value of the home as well as what you currently owe, but that's really going to depend, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But just having that information handy just will help this process. And they typically take, depending on the calculator, anywhere from 20 minutes to 45 minutes to fill out. So just kind of set aside some time. And then also just having some general information about your son or daughter's academics, their GPA, their grade point average. They'll ask for SAT scores, and that's primarily for schools that are going to be awarding merit money, because they're going to want to, they're going to base some of that merit money on, how the student has performed in high school. Anything else you want to add to that, Mark? That I may have missed, because this is a really important.
This is it. This is really where it emanates. And it really, thank you, Abby, for emphasizing. It's really about the pragmatism that we talked about, and the predictability. And I have to say, I like to coach parents and kids to actually do this together. Not many kids want to. A lot of parents think they want to save their kids from having to. I think I've found the most responsible, not because they pay less or more, the most educated students are those who actually do this stuff with their parents. We'll get into something a little bit later about like how to kind of look at like each individual family, and I will talk about that then. But when kids do this, they are empowered rather than defeated. They may feel defeated at first, but I can tell you that when kids and families don't kind of do this homework, we end up in April of their senior year looking at a list of colleges and being completely surprised, and that is very defeating, and it's very stressful for families. So the net price calculator and doing a little bit of work together is really important. Before Abby goes to the next screen, I'm going to preface it to say that when Abby talked about using your academic and financial information, the next slides that we use are going to focus on 4 families that all have the same profile. They own a house that costs the same. They own a house, the value of the house is the same. The debt that they have. So humor us and really, we want you to pretend that each of the 4 families, and I'll start off, and Abby, you can go. I'll start off looking if we could all at the next.
Hold on, just kidding.
It's Okay.
not coming up. Hang on. Oh, there we
Yeah,
go. Hold on.
this is an extra slide that we have to manipulate it up.
Vermont, right?
Yes, we
Okay.
call this the Maine Vermont. Now, if you're a parent looking at it the first time, your heart rate just began increasing because there's so many numbers. Please follow along with Mr. Defoe and look in the upper left-hand corner. And you will see those are the demographics I was referencing. We're all going to make believe that there are 4 families with 4 children. They all have the same SATs. They all have the same GPA of 3.8. They're all in the top 15% of their class. They all are at, let's say, Thornton with a class size of 350. They're all declared on their last income tax $2,000 student income. They all have no assets. They all live in a $200,000 home with $160,000 debt. And there are 4 in the house with 1 going to college. Why is that important? Because we're going to show you that the same families can have a very different outcome with financial aid. And again, a lot of this information is what would be put into a net price calculator. So if you would follow along with me, let's just look at the University of Maine and let's look at gross income. All 4 families, in addition to having all those demographics, we broke it into 2 sets of families. Family 1 and 2 make $65,000 in gross income, and family 3 and 4, their gross income's $110,000. If we go to the assets, we're going to say that the families with $65,000, one of them has, if you're following along, assets. Family 1 has $6,500 in assets, and family 2 has $65,000. Family 3, who makes $110,000, has $9,500 in assets, and family 4 has $65,000. So you can see actually that families 1 and 3 are pretty similar, and 2 and 4, there are differences. Taxes paid is something that will become a number that, while you might think it's super important, you'll end up seeing that it has an effect, but very small. And the family 1 and 2 pay $4,700 in taxes, and 3 and 4 pay $10,200. Now we're looking at UMaine. So for all of these children, the cost of attendance is $23,160. Family 1, because of the financial profile, if you look at the estimated grants, grants are free money. Federal grants can be awarded up to $5,900 per student, and it's called a Pell Grant. And this family got one for $925. None of the other families got a Pell Grant. There are also grants and scholarships, which are free money. And we're talking about UMO, and we're going to look at what UMO dispensed to each family. So families 1 and 2, you can see that for UMO, family 1 got $5,600 in grants and scholarships for their child. Family 2, $4,700, families 3 and 4. Now, this is where you're remembering that the children that all had the 3.8, for the total scholarship money done with this financial aid calculator, those children only got $1,000 from University of Maine. That's not a judgment. That's just what we're looking at. And then we have the total free money for each family, and you subtract it as Abby did on that first. You basically, your free money from $23,160 leaves you with your estimated net price. And discouraging for some families, always a little careful about I'm saying this, discouraging for families 3 and 4 might be that they've got a very strong child, but because of their income, you're invariably many times going to see that they're going to pay more out of pocket net excuse me, net price.
I think a really important takeaway from looking at that first example as well is thinking when you go back to the assets, um, what we hear a lot is people thinking that if they have money in savings, I don't want to save for college because it's going to hurt me in the financial aid process. As a general rule, that is not the case. You will, so you can see, family one and two, very big difference in terms of, their savings or their assets. And it did not, the same with families three and four, did not substantially impact, what that net price ended up being. So it dispels the myth that you hear sometimes, that you shouldn't save for college. So,
And we've got the same for families that are looking at Vermont and having done a net price calculator. I'm not going to take you through each of those again. I'd ask you to scan through. The gross incomes are the same, the assets are the same, the taxes paid are the same. The total cost of attendance is the same for Vermont. It's different from UMO, but you see that the estimated grants for the Pell family, that first family, I'm calling them a Pell family because they have high need based upon the net price calculator. And the Pell grant for Vermont was $1,200.70, and the other three families didn't get any of that aid. The grants and scholarships for Vermont were 15,000 for family one, 12,600 for family two, and you can see both families three and four, 10,600. Then you have the total amount, and then you see the net price. This is very predictable. So we're not, like Abby and I didn't put these numbers onto this sheet. We put the information into their net price calculators, and this is what came out. And I can tell you with certainty that most of my students who fall into a family like any of these are not going to, because their son or daughter had better grades than another student who had the same grades, going to be getting much more money, because a lot of it is need-based rather than grants and scholarship. That sounds very discouraging, and I don't want to sound like a pessimist, but what I've said to Abby a lot is we've done our homework enough now, and it's not like a game to us. But when I share information with a family and they share it with me, Abby and I can predict with a pretty good guess, sometimes being wrong, but how much, because of how much a family makes, how much grant and scholarship they're going to get, because it doesn't vary a lot, because it's mostly need-based rather than honestly scholarship-based. We're going to look at another slide, and I'll spend less time trying to be pedant. It's the same students. It's the same student looking at two more colleges. We didn't change the demographics. We didn't change the gross income, assets, taxes paid. The cost of attendance, as you see, went up here for Bowdoin. And the cost for Bowdoin here when we did this was $65,590. The cost for Emmanuel, which is another private college, was $56,807. Now, one of the things about Bowdoin, I'm going to actually hand this off to Abby to talk about in a minute. I'm not done yet, but one of the things that's startling for many families is the estimated net price for Bowdoin there at the bottom. And it is important to know that when you do a net price calculator, it's important to know that these colleges that are sometimes very expensive and say they will meet need will actually meet the need of that family. So some colleges say they're going to meet full need. The one thing they leave out is that, it's not like hitting the jackpot, but you have to get in to that college before that net price becomes what it is. And that sounds like, oh yeah, well, that's obvious. I think our experience with, depending on financial situations, is families in the category of $65,000 to $110,000, their ability to get into colleges like Bowdoin is more limited than families that can pay more. That is a highly charged comment, but it is what we see on a consistent basis. So this is where we absolutely don't want your son or daughter not looking at Bowdoin if they qualify, but getting in is challenging, and it's not always about academics. It sometimes is about ability to pay, and if you can't, while this would be the net price, we see very few students getting that package because they don't get in. Sounds awful, but now the other private college, Emmanuel, who doesn't meet as much need, you see the gap there. And most of our students, we use Emmanuel just as a general illustration of what many of our students who say, I want to leave the state, Mr. Defoe, and I want to go to a smaller school. They have more amenities. I like that program. All my colleges are going to look like that. And if you've done your homework and your net price calculators, and your son and daughter has only looked at Emmanuel and 5 others like it, you can predict, if you're in this family situation, that is how much you would pay per year. And if you can afford it, and that's why we say it's very personal, then you can afford it. But if you're a family that can't, for whatever reason, because you don't have if you don't have money saved, or it really is going to come down to another piece of this, which is loan debt. Abby, what do you have to say before I beat this to a pulp?
I know we talked about waiting to the end. Maybe we should continue to wait to the end for questions. I just know that this is a lot of information. It's a lot of numbers. I think the big takeaway is, if you're looking at all of these numbers and, not even the specifics of it, but just realizing, that you really can get those, if you fill out accurately these net price calculators, you can get to these numbers yourselves, and they're going to be more real to you because you're going to be inputting your information. And so you will have a very concrete number to work with. And I think, as sometimes frightening as it is, and I say that sort of because I've been through it. It's also really empowering too. It puts you in the driver's seat a little bit, because then you have some control and over where you go from there, and what kind of schools you want to open up and look at with your son or daughter. So I think I'll move from here. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to share with you, see if I can find it. I think you can see it, right? The FAME comparing costs and financial aid. Can you see that? Mr. Defoe?
Oh, I definitely.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, you're the one
You're going to have to maybe, don't forget to scroll when you get to the bottom app.
This whole Zoom thing is new for Mark and me, because again, we usually do this in a small, more intimate setting. So this is, this is new. So I want to share this with you because I think this is just an amazing, incredibly helpful organizational resource that is available to you. FAME, which Mark already referenced, and we will continue to speak about them in only the highest regard because they are just such an incredible resource for families in Maine around financing for education. But they have, if you go on their website, They have all sorts of resources, but this is one of them that, as we looked at those numbers that Mark just went through, where you can take um, financial aid award letters. So let me back up for a second here. When your son or daughter applies to school, which will happen in the fall of their senior year, you will be um, you'll be uh, applying for financial aid in the fall as well, sort of fall into the winter. And then you will get financial aid. Your son or daughter will get a financial aid award letter from the schools that they get admitted to. Those award letters are all going to look, they're hard to compare apples to apples because of the way they will show you kind of the tuition and the fees and the room and board. They'll give you that cost of attendance. They'll include any federal loans, and any grants and scholarships. And then you'll have sort of that net price that you can be expected to pay. So, but the way they describe it in their letters is sometimes going to look different. So this kind of chart here can help you really plug those numbers in and begin to compare colleges side by side. So you can see here I won't go through all of it because it's pretty self-explanatory, but as you plug the numbers in, you come down here with that sort of out-of-pocket cost. And that's that cost, again, that we talked about. This is the really critical, even beyond the net price. It's this out-of-pocket cost that you really want to be thinking about, and what is it that we're looking at. I will say, I just want to point out that this, and I appreciate that this, whatever you want to call it, it's a worksheet. Sorry, this worksheet talks about loans, but it'll plug in loans, but really only the federal subsidized and unsubsidized loans that students might and often are awarded. So it's not going to include parent loans and things like that, because that's when you get into that those might look a lot different with higher interest rates. So it's just gonna take into account those government student loans. If we move so then you have that number here with the out-of-pocket cost of 7,000. We're gonna just use example X, 7,167. And then if you come over here, this is where you can start to plug in and figure out what is your family's, begin to calculate the resources that you have to cover that out-of-pocket cost. So, in this particular case, this student got a $1,000. When we say outside scholarship, that means that's money, free money. It's a scholarship money and it's free, but these are those scholarships that people talk about where they apply, they're not connected to the institution, they're not awarded on the financial aid award letter. These are outside scholarships, groups, companies that have them, and students and we encourage students to apply to these scholarships. So this particular student got $1,000. So that brings that down. Then you look at what are the students' current savings, what's their estimated summer savings that they're going to have before they begin college, what might the family have put in college savings, and is there any money from relatives, grandparents that gifts that the student might get from graduation, anticipated money that you might be getting as gifts. So you add that all up and then you get, that remaining balance. So then you're looking at, okay, this is that figure that we can't cover. So, we've got the student loans, the $5,500 in student loans, and we've, got the money that we've, come together, that we have the resources that we have as a family. And then we are left with this sort of gap, what we call the gap, which is in this case a pretty reasonable gap, I would say, of $3,000. And then you start to look at, that's when you begin to look at how do you cover that gap? How do you cover that money? And this is where, if it's reasonable and doable, you can have a monthly payment plan with a college, and you'll just be paying, in this case, $336 per month for 10 months. You can take out a Federal Plus loan. These are the parent loans that you are borrowing that money, and it's going to be it's going to be a low interest rate, but higher than the typically higher than the student loan rates. You typically always want the student loans before any other loans. So if you're going to take out loans, you want to take those federal loans first, because they're going to be lowest interest. Then you may look at Federal Plus loans for the parents, or even private loans where they're typically going to be in the student's name, but the parent has to co-sign. I have found personally, because I just went through this, that the FAME has some great resources for these private loans, and there's something called the main loan, and that interest rate was actually lower than the Federal Plus by quite a bit than the Federal Plus loan. So, you really have to do your research there if you're looking at taking out loans. Additionally, sometimes students will be awarded work study money. We don't typically suggest that you factor that in terms of, you have to think about, because the work study money is, they have to get a job on campus, and they get that money, but the checks go to the students. So oftentimes we find that the students are using that money just for their, daily living expenses and things like that when they're there. So you have to kind of figure out, are you going to use that and factor that into how you're going to bridge that gap. I can't sort of stress enough, how important and valuable this is. I'm just going to share my own experience. As I mentioned before, I have twin daughters, so we were looking at, sending two of them to school. The summer before, when they were beginning, the summer before their senior year, we sat down and did net price calculators, and created, used this work sheet, and in order to compare costs. And a couple things that I would say about that. There was one school, I won't say what the school was, but there was one school that both of my daughters desperately wanted to go to in New York City. And when we did this work, and it is work, it takes a lot of time to go through, but it's worth it. We were able to sit down with them and say, this is not a school that we are going to be able to afford. They both said, looked at us and smiled and said, okay, we'd really like to apply anyway, because we think that we're going to get more money than you're saying we're going to get. So we said, great, go ahead and apply. And they did. And they both were accepted, and we got the financial aid packages. And they came back almost to the dime of what we had already, anticipated. And so it was a much easier conversation, and it really wasn't, they knew we had already been very upfront about it. It came in what we had predicted. And so we were able to sort of let go of that school. It's really hard if you wait with all of this until those financial aid packages come in. It's spring of the senior year, and it becomes an emotional decision at that point, because suddenly they've gotten into their dream school, and you just suddenly like, okay, we're going to just figure out how to pay for this, and take out all sorts of loans that may not and probably don't make sense financially long term. So the more work that you can do ahead of time, and the more open you are. And I know this is really hard for some families, because it's, And I will say, personally, it was a challenge for us to sort of, talk to our kids about our financial, it's very vulnerable as a parent. But it is really a big and important part of this process. So, and in the long run, I think, again, really empowers everybody, including your your son or daughter, who's going through it, so they, they just, so that they know. So, all right. Let's see. We are on. I think we're going to go back to our PowerPoint here. Okay, Mark.
So there are some sample, I'm gonna say, I think these are important questions that you could ask about. Let's make believe we're talking about UMaine, University of Vermont, Bowdoin, and 6 other schools. There's a lot of questions that I think you should ask. These are 4 sample, and I'll explain why I think it's important. Because what has been the history of tuition and fee increases? This is one of the favorite things for parents to call us about. It's not about us. They're trying to give us information that we can share with our students. So it's like parents looking out for next sets of kids and parents, because they'll go, I went to X college, Mr. Depot, it looked really good, but there was a 6% increase over the first 2 years of college. And now we're worried about another 3% each year. I'm not sure we're ever going to make it to the end, because they had done the worksheets as Abby had done, and as they were coached. But what they didn't count on was that the colleges that they were going to. Now, you can find that out from the colleges, but you can also find it out, and I don't want Abby to go there yet. We'll show you this place. It's the National Center for Educational Statistics. It's another government-sponsored find out the truth about the college. Average debt amounts that students graduate with. I think that's generally important, but it kind of is antithetical to what we're saying, which is you're going to be able to figure it out with your net price calculator anyhow. But it's interesting for that one. What percentage of students take longer than 4 years to graduate? This is one of the most commonsensical things that you must examine. And a lot of this might depend on son or daughter, your predictability about, oh, well, are they an average student who's might not graduate in 4 years? If they've been dealing with, let's say, mental health concerns, it doesn't mean they won't finish in 4 years. Have they come to the place where they're going to be able to handle that? Are they academically a little bit in over their head, in your opinion, but they want to go there? And what do the statistics say about kids with a B or a C average in graduating in 4 years? Because all of the forms that Abby has showed you and that I've explained to you are based on 4 years of college. And if the college, as some of them do, 60% of their, none of the ones we were looking at, but 60% of their students take 6 years to graduate, well, that's a whole different ball game. And we all want to believe our children won't be one of those that might do it. But if the number's super high, what is that about? Are they not kids not getting into classes they should as a freshman? These are questions you need to, I know. And if you don't do it, it's okay, but you're going to have less really significant information. Will my financial aid award stay the same every year? Usually they'll say, if you maintain this, your award will say. If they don't say it, you should be calling the financial aid offices before you make your final decision. Doesn't mean you need to call all 6 colleges that you have a letter for. I am going to have Abby go to the National Center for Educational Statistics. So in addition to these questions, and she has to, thanks, Ab. So the College Navigator, and I'm not going to have Abby go into it because it can feel overwhelming, but you can basically choose a college and you can put in certain criteria and find it out about every college. And some of the numbers are very endearing. You're going to be like, oh, that is a really good information to know about financial aid at this college. And then some of them are like, oh, that graduation rate. Now, one thing that you can also find here at the College Navigator, um, and digging deeper into some government like resources, is what will your child's ability to be paying the loan based upon their projected income. So I had a boy 2 years ago that wanted to go to um, X school that I'll actually just say it. It was Maine Maritime, and um, the total out of pocket for the family was going to be about 80,000 after 4 years. I had another student where it was 80,000, and that student, their major was going to be education. And the person who's going to graduate from Maine Maritime, if they stayed there, graduated, and did the projected career, they were going to be able to pay their loan off a lot sooner. And we think some of that's commonsensical, but I think that's a factor that, just like I'm saying to you out loud, and some of you are going, that's not me. And some of you might be saying it is. For some people, this conversation is less about can we afford it? And it becomes more about admissibility, because that family can afford the out of pocket for whatever reason. For most families in Saco, and again, this is a generalization, this is really a concern, and that we should be doing this homework. So I'm just kind of modeling that as counselors, if we know that, we spend a lot less time with the students saying, we don't see that very often, but we really want to pay attention to it. Now, when the student says to me, I'm worried about my mom or dad qualifying for a loan, that's something where we're going to refer you to the Finance Authority of Maine so you can find out what your best loan resources are going to be. Not saying you will or won't get a loan, but I think doing that extra homework, this sounds a little bit overwhelming. I know we've now gotten we are really close to the end, but if you just are able to take a deep breath after tonight, and when you start looking at colleges, really enjoy that journey for your son or daughter, like finding their best fits, that admissibility, and is it going to be a good fit? That is so joyful to do. But it must be tempered with your own family situation, in the sense of making sure they and the school counselor are looking across the board. When kids do this with their parents, there's often a lot of emotion, but I'm saying those kids are really prepared when April comes. Abby?
Okay.
Abby, you're doing a great job with this. You've taken so much stress off me tonight, because I'm just talking and you were doing all the legwork. Parents, thanks for hanging with us. We're gonna go over Abby's how do I prepare and a few closing comments, and then we're gonna really want to take questions.
Okay. I'll move quickly through this. So, I think hopefully we've driven this point home about the net price calculator. So I will not continue with that one. But I think it's important to, again, encourage, support your child's academics. We talked a little bit about merit money, and that's that free money that's connected to academics and how your student has done in school. And again, depending on the type of school that they're looking at, we're not just talking about kind of that 4.0 all A student, but there is merit money out there for students that have worked hard and have done well in school. So just to continue to support that is important. So you want to look at the history of how colleges are meeting financial need and offering need, whether they're offering need-based or merit aid. That website that we just went into that Mark talked a bit about, the Center for Educational Research Statistics, is a really great place to start. When we look at along those lines, colleges are going to use different aid formulas to determine the aid. Sorry, I just have to let somebody else in here. And they, so all colleges are going to be using, you will be filling out the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. That's a federal form. It's online. You'll do it. It opens in October of your child's senior year, in that fall of their senior year when they're applying. Um, for the junior parents right now, you're going to be, they'll be asking for tax information from 2020. So once you've done your taxes, that information that you have from your taxes that you do this spring, that's the information that you're going to be inputting and that they're going to be using to calculate the aid. So, it's really, so every school is going to be requiring the FAFSA. There are, it's income driven. They're going to look at savings, checkings, cash, investment accounts, 529 accounts, which are savings accounts. The primary residence, though, is not included on, when they're looking at, when you're filling out for a school that only requires the FAFSA. Some colleges, mostly private, when Mark and I, first kind of looked at this, there were maybe about 250, 260 colleges that are going to require an additional form called the CSS profile. This is because this is a pretty, I say it's a pretty invasive form. It's going to get into much more detail about your finances. And the reason for that really is because they do have, these are going to be schools that have a lot more money to give out. And so they want to, they want to be sure they're giving it to families that need it. And so that financial form is going to ask for, it's going to look at home equity, assets held in the students' siblings' names, retirement accounts, assets belonging to non-custodial parents. The FAFSA, only one parent, if you're in a divorced family, only one parent is going to fill out the FAFSA. But if you're also filling out the profile, that's going to look at both parents' information. So I want to talk just briefly about thinking about your child versus parent savings. And I bring this up because it's diving a little bit into financial plan, a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I think it's important for you to talk to your financial advisor or talk to FAME about this. But what I do know and can share with you is that parents' assets, when you're filling out these forms, they're going to be assessed at a much lower rate than students' assets. Something on the around 5.5% for parents and 20 to 25% for students. So what that means is, like, for every $1,000 that's in a child's bank account, the federal government's going to determine the estimated family contribution that's going to be determined by the federal government from that FAFSA. That's going to increase by at least 200. That same $1,000 in a parent's account is only going to increase it by about no more than a little bit more than $50. So it's important to think about that, because you might want to think about, if your child, and this sort of moves into the next bullet here, if your student has a lot of money in their savings account, that's awesome, that's great. You just may want to think about moving it because it's going to be assessed at a higher rate. And one way to think about using that money is to, if they're going to need things for college, if they're going to need a computer, if they're, any of those things that you can buy ahead of time that they will need for college are going to be considered college expenses. Use that money on that. So, and along those lines too, as much as you can begin to pay down any consumer debt you have, credit card loans, auto loans, the better for you in terms of, what your profile is going to look like, your financial profile is going to look like, because unfortunately, the financial world punishes you for having large stacks of cash, but really does not credit families for having high interest debt on a credit card or loan. So I get that question from parents a lot, sort of, well, if we have, a lot of, debt on our credit cards, is that going to impact? And it's not going to impact your aid, but you're going to have that, so it's not going to help you. And, I guess the last one, I mean, I think this doesn't really apply for, the majority of folks, I think, but if you are thinking, if you are in a situation where you potentially get end of year bonuses, and you have the ability to maybe defer that in the year that you're going to be filling this out, it's something to think about, because base income year largely determines the student's financial aid eligibility as a college freshman, and also on, influences the amount of aid he or she will be awarding in subsequent years. So, final thoughts. Here we are, we're at the end.
Yeah, I think the thing that we have emphasized planning with some really pragmatic stuff it's not secret. It's the truth. It comes out fairly realistically most of the time. I think our not plea, but our advice is to start having those conversations that are really difficult. And I don't want you to think we just like kind of Pollyanna, like, oh, just do it. We understand having those conversations can be vulnerable, and can be actually incredibly enlightening for some kids too, because, if you've had grandpa putting in a lot of money, or grandma, or you have anybody, or you've been putting money and the kid is really proud of having $15,000 in savings, they need to know that at least 20 cents to the dollar is going to be taxed. So they're only going to be getting, so if you don't consult a financial advisor about what's best to do with it and your particular family. So while we're giving these general things, it is with the caveat that you should do that. And really, every family is different. It is easy to get caught up in the storm when everyone's looking at colleges to do what the neighbors do, or you really just have to settle down and look at your own situation. And assess admissibility and affordability, not just the college list has to have both parts of it.
All right.
I want to self-disclose that Abby and I had some worries about doing this in this forum, because when we do it, person to us to our audience, we see them, we see what their reactions are, we can stop and ask questions. We have had some experience with these kinds of Zoom meetings where when we do that, it really is difficult for everybody else to get back into the presentation. We made that decision to wait until the end, and people can stay with us if you want to stay and have questions. If you feel like I don't want to stay, I want to come back and look at the recording, you can do that, but we'll spend as much time as we need answering, the general questions that you have.
I think I know the chat was off during our presentation. I think that I just turned it on, and maybe somebody can tell me if I did it correctly. Because if that's easier to ask a question, I think sometimes in a chat, but also feel free to just, you can't, yes, I think you have to do it in chat, because I think you're all muted.
Can you
Oh, there we go. So yes, thank you, Deborah. If anybody has any questions, you can put those in the chat, and then Mark and I can try to answer them for you. Yes, great question. The presentation was recorded, so we will be sending out an email tomorrow, hopefully, with the link.
Yes.
For the recording. I mean, hopefully it'll be tomorrow. I'm not sure about that. So the PDF file, so yeah, some of I'm wondering the PDF file,
I
maybe
think
the FAFSA forms. Any of the pieces that we shared tonight, we will make sure that we can get that out there so people have access to those. Sounds like we just did, we answered everyone's questions. It's hard in this format, I know. So,
the other, as you might be writing, we're getting the questions now, which is
okay,
great. I do want to say one thing, Abby, so if we
yeah,
don't forget, if people or some might leave, please call your school counselor. I I work in an office who have colleagues committed to meeting your needs, but if they don't know what your questions are, or they want to team up with you, but if you don't, you might be doing something on your own that you could get some of our help.
okay. So, a great question about what tax year is going to be used for the current juniors. So, the FAFSA, that financial form and the profile that we talked about, they use prior. So for the class of the class of 2022, you're going to be using 2020 tax information. So, you know, sometimes, and I'm just going to bring this up here, sometimes your financial situation, let's say this year in 2021, ends up looking a whole lot different than 2020. That's when you get those financial aid packages that are based on 2020, that's when you can go back to a college and say, hey, you were using 2020 data, but my financial situation really changed in 2021. And you do have that ability to do that, but you will be using 2020 data. So the next one, Defo, do you want to talk about subsidized and unsubsidized loans, the difference between them?
I do briefly. I think that's a really good and important question, because those subsidized and unsubsidized are the federal government loans, and they are one is going to have a higher interest rate than the other. And Abby, you're going to need to help me with this, because I am actually forgetting. Tell me if one needs to be paid off sooner than the other.
No, but the subsidized is going to be, it's not accruing interest while the student is in college. Unsubsidized loans are accruing interest. Again, the interest rate is really low, but the subsidized, you always want to take subsidized before you take unsubsidized. If you're not going to take the whole amount, subsidized is better because it's not accruing interest while they're in school. Another question, is there a directory for school counselors? And I would say, what's the best way to find that, Mark? I think if somebody doesn't know who their school counselor is.
I am not sure that is on the website. I know it's on the FSR index for staff, but again, typically what we would say is it would be on son or daughter's report cards, but because of COVID, they're not sending those out. And usually at the beginning of a 9th grade year, you get that. But if that's not true, I'm going to say, actually, I'm going to type in, this is probably going to make
Well,
her.
while you do that, I think he's going to put it in the chat.
Oh, no, because I can't find it. I was going to say, I think that we should have them email.
Yeah.
Mary Ann.
Yep. Okay, you're going to do it? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So another question. You use the standard 4-person family. Can you modify the number of people in the household? So that's a great question. The question is whether we used, when we did our examples of Bowdoin, Emmanuel, UMaine, and UVM, just for the purposes of keeping everything the same, we just used four person household. When you fill out the calculator, you will be entering your own family's information. So if there's just one, yeah, you'll be putting in your own information for that. So it's going to be personalized.
Including academic information,
Mhm.
which the students can tell in PowerSchool what their GPA is. If this is an important point for Thornton Academy, we don't do a public rank of where son or daughter is. We don't do decile or class rank anymore. So on that one, if you're needing help, email son or daughter's school counselor to see if we're able to give you a kind of an estimate to use for that. And that's a fair thing to do in terms of, percentage, not specific placement in the college, because we won't do that. You got a question, we're here. We want to answer them.
You're welcome to.
Hopefully we haven't overwhelmed you. This is the biggest group we've had. And again, the bonus there is usually we had to limit it to 23 to 25. So we had 5 or 6 more tonight, and that's really exciting to me. And I appreciate you being here.
As a frame of reference, the first year that Mark and I did this, which was probably 6 years ago, Mark,
Yep.
I think we had 3 people show up, 2 or 3 people show up, which was really delightful. It was very intimate, but so I think it's a testament to that it's definitely more talked about, and more, which is a good thing. I think it's the financial aid landscape has changed, cost of college has changed, and I think people are more willing to talk more freely about it and openly, so, which is a good thing. So it looks, I think we don't have any more questions. So I think, we'll end it here. But again, please reach out to us, to your, son or daughter's school counselor, if you can find them. And yeah, we really appreciate you joining us tonight and taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, there's one more question in here. I don't know if she's still here.
Oh, yeah. So if people are still here, and hopefully Rose is still here, I'll answer that question.
Okay.
Abby said one of the financial aid forms is more basic, and it is, and one is more detailed. Should you be worried? I don't think that would be the language I would use. I would suggest that in terms of often what people will frame when they say the word is, as I reveal that I have much more or many more assets than are required or needed for the FAFSA, which is the more basic form, it is likely that you're going to see less need-based support. But I wouldn't say so much of that as being worried. I would say they're more detailed. The CSS profile is much more invasive. If you have a yacht, they're gonna know. They're gonna want to know what cars you have. They really are invasive. There is also a form. Not that I think many of you should worry about it. It used to be more international students, but I'm finding more students who apply to they call themselves prestigious liberal arts colleges are having our non-internationals do something called the IDOC, which the CSS profile is a form that you actually have to pay for as opposed to the FAFSA. The CSS profile is $24 to register and $16 for each school that you fill out the financial aid form. It's a college board thing. We're not really too pumped about that. The IDOC actually is an extension of that and isn't costly. But again, that even gets more invasive than the CSS profile.
I'm gonna just stop Mark right there because that was overwhelming.
But it's just, if you're gonna be, Son of Dog's gonna be applying to super duper prestigious schools, you're gonna see a lot of information, but I don't think it's one to worry about. It's just be prepared that you're gonna have to fill those out. And I should stop. now. I hope I answered Rose's question. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.